Revolve Renewable Power is a developer of solar, wind, hydro, and battery power projects in the US, Canada, and Mexico. The company just provided an update on the progress of several of its projects, with significant milestones expected to be achieved in the coming months. CEO Myke Clark and Executive Chair Steve Dalton are here to review the business update and discuss the upcoming milestones. I'm Martin Gagel with Market Radius Research. Please remember, this is neither a recommendation nor investment advice. We're here to learn about the company. Hey, how you doing? It's been a while. How has your summer been?
My summer's been great. Yeah, it was. We were just saying it's been a busy summer at Revolve. Had a little bit of time off, which was nice early in the summer, but things continue to press along here in the company. So it's been good for me. You, Steve?
Yeah, pretty much the same. And busy summer as always. I mean, I think if you're not busy in renewables, you're doing something wrong. So, still plenty
Yeah.
going on.
All right. You guys put out a pretty substantial news release this morning, giving some business updates on several of your projects in the markets. Why don't you give us a quick overview on the key points of the news release, and then we can dig into some of the key aspects of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we find, with respect to all of the projects that we're developing, is that there is always progress being made, but it's sometimes putting it into the context and putting into this type of an update is really useful for investors to see that, as we move along the development path, all of these projects continue to create value and move forward. And that's really what we're trying to illustrate with this release, I guess, is to put it into a bit of context. We've had some pretty meaningful progress over the last few months for sure, throughout summer, and then leading into the fall as well. In Mexico, in Alberta, in Canada, we're seeing things growing at a pretty strong pace right now, both on the utility side of the business, on the distributed generation side of the business. And of course, you combine that with our core operating assets as well, which continue to generate that strong, stable, recurring revenue. It's been a busy summer, and we expect it to be a busy fall leading through to the end of 2025 as well.
You discussed the distributed generation and some large projects down in Mexico. The Mexican market seems to be doing quite well. Can you give us a dig into a bit of what's going on there and what we should expect out of Mexico?
Yeah, and maybe I can provide a couple of comments on it. I think we've been talking about Mexico obviously for a good while. It was a market that not a lot happened in for the 4 or 5 years under the previous administration. But I think if you look back over the last really over the last 12 months in particular, since the new president come in, you've kind of had this increasing level of regulatory certainty, rather than the uncertainty we had been talking about. And that's really transpired across a couple of different things. The government came in and said they were going to launch an energy plan, I think probably around this time last year, which they did. Coming off of that, they then said they were going to do a number of different things. One was enact a whole kind of legislative kind of framework around the sector, which I think was back in March, maybe this year. You saw a whole raft of kind of secondary legislation coming out, which really started to give investors a bit of confidence around, okay, this is, the playing field, if you like, in the rules of engagement. You then saw, which I think was probably a bit underlooked by the market in April, this national development plan, where effectively the government have laid out for the next 5 years, when it comes to the energy side, the amount of megawatts that they're looking to bring on, and it's pretty significant. I think there was something like nearly 30 gigawatts of new power generation, which they've kind of earmarked to bring in. And they've gone so far as to say, there'll be a certain portion of that, which is, unsurprisingly, is probably a large portion of it for the state. But they also said there was going to be kind of 6.4 gigawatts of privately owned generation that they're looking to bring into the market to sit alongside what they're hoping the state utility, the CFE, done. So if you kind of break that down, you're talking about over a gigawatt of new renewable generation to come into a market, which for a number of years had very little. So, we're really excited about what we're seeing. I think as we kind of came through the summer, you started to see that kind of translate into actual momentum at a project level. There's been a bit of recent bit of press for ourselves, where we were engaging with the state government in Tamaulipas, along with the transmission operator Senase, around our projects in particular. So, I think really excited about what's going on in Mexico. It's a lot of the same kind of themes that you're seeing in both Canada and the US around increasing power demand, a huge level of underinvestment in the sector, both on the generation side, but also on the transmission side. And that's all kind of, let's say, moving towards a position where you're just going to need a lot more generation. And it's going to have to be a combination of, like I said, kind of state and private. And then I think if you drill into our portfolio in particular, like we've always been very well placed and always very confident around the development portfolio that we had. It's in a key area within Mexico, obviously up in the northeast, where it's from a resource perspective, one of the key areas for wind development. There are really only two where you have really strong wind resource. This is one of them. And then it also, like I think we've said a number of times on this in our kind of news around the sector, it's located very close to Monterrey, which is big industrial driver of economic demand in Mexico as well. So a lot of we're expecting certainly a lot of activity on the projects going forwards, particularly as we kind of move through the next couple of months.
So what sorts of milestones or what catalyst do you expect to hit over the coming, let's say through the end of the year, or let's say in the first part of next year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the projects that particularly the late stage projects here, where we have nearly 500 megawatts of projects that we've been working on for a long number of years. And these are projects where we have a lot of the key kind of components already done, be it land, wind resource, basic engineering. We had done environmental studies, So I think there's been a mix of refreshing a lot of that work, and I think we commented on that in the news release today, where we're updating project designs and layouts and engineering. We're in the process of interconnection, and there's a bit of a refresh in some of those kind of studies that we've done, but we'd certainly hope to be making progress on interconnection. And I think on the permitting side, now that you've had that secondary legislation and you're starting to see, the key bodies and key regulatory bodies that we need to deal with kind of being formulated, if you like, by the government, we now have a clear path on the different stakeholders that we need to engage to kind of move the project forward. But like I said, we're coming from a base of a lot of work that's been done over a long number of years, so it's not like we're having to start from scratch. This is a case of bringing, fairly advanced projects and just refreshing them for the new kind of framework, if you like, that's there. So, I think you'll see progress across a number of different fronts on both of those projects. And like I said, they're kind of pretty material parts of our portfolio. So, pretty excited about what we've got in front of us.
Well, you've been working on these projects for several years, but only in the last year has really the regulatory clarity come into it. I would think now that it's there are probably more investors coming into the sector. Are you ahead of a lot of the bulge of the other people coming in, maybe giving you some advantage of being one of the earlier ones to cross the finish line, so to speak, and maybe a little more attractive of projects?
I think when it comes to wind development, absolutely. Like wind development, there's a few things you can't avoid, and one of them is you need to put a met mast up and sit there for 2-3 years and collect the wind resource. We've 5 years plus on most of these sites. Even on the other sites that we have, which we don't talk about too much, like we do have a number of other projects. I think the total portfolio is around 1.2 gigawatts or something like that. But we're definitely ahead of the curve from that perspective. I think the reason why we stuck it out in Mexico while the previous administration was there, and it was obviously very difficult to get things done, was because the land positions that we have are in that key wind zone in Mexico where there's not a lot of real estate, and if you can kind of maintain your position there, have all of that work done, it was always going to lead us to being in a very good position once that let's say regulatory certainty came around. So I think we're pretty happy with the position we have. Obviously there's still a good bit of work ahead of us, but like I said, if you're going to develop wind in Mexico, there's only a certain number of places you can do it. We're right bang in the middle of it all. And I think you are starting to see more investors looking at Mexico again. Like I think before the previous administration, like it was probably, if not the fastest growing renewable market in Latin America, certainly one of the fastest growing. So, they've shown an ability to deliver multi-gigawatts of, new renewable generation once you get that regulatory piece kind of clear. And like I said, the kind of rules of engagement as to how you can kind of do that certain for developers like ourselves. And I think we're now reaching that point. And there's a lot of other different things which government have done, which gives us a bit of comfort as well. Like I think there was a big announcement in the last 2 weeks where they're investing $8 billion in transmission upgrades, you know, and a very clear plan around new substations, new transmission lines. You know, again, you didn't really see that historically, whereas now they've come out and they've said, this is what we're going to do to facilitate all this new generation, which they've identified in this development plan that they announced back in April. So, you know, you're starting to see a fairly structured and coordinated approach to how they want to deal with the market, and they're actually meeting a lot of the deadlines that they've set themselves, which, you know, is really encouraging.
Just remind us, what are the big de-risking events, which conversely is a big value creation events, where on these utility scale projects, it puts it in the position where you could partner or sell it or real drive value off of it? Is it the interconnection? Is it the selling agreement of the power? What are those catalysts?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a bit of an incremental process. So, like, we'd argue now, like, the value in those projects is, you know, fairly strong. I think, particularly when you look at our current market cap, but it is an incremental kind of value creation, if you like. You know, from the first day you sign the land. I think particularly in zones where we are, where, like I said, the real estate is limited. You only have a certain, you know, the wind resource is only strong in a certain area. We're right in the middle of that area. Once you go kind of outside of it, then obviously having land there is less attractive. So, you know, I think from signing land to doing your permitting, you know, obviously there are key ones like interconnection, and particularly if you're going to sign a PPA, you know, they'd be fairly large catalysts in any project in terms of value creation. But, you know, we like to think there's a lot of value already embedded in these projects. You know, the key is really now delivering it and getting the final pieces done with this new kind of regulatory framework. But yeah, I mean, it's no different than really any of the markets we operate in terms of those key milestones around project development.
And north to Alberta, you've got a lot of projects running there. You gave a bit of an update. Give us an overview on what's going on in Alberta.
Yeah, so the Bright Meadows project in Alberta is a just under 16 megawatt solar project that we've been developing for some time now. And the key piece there is really around the provincial permit. So the Alberta Utilities Commission really manages everything from an overall permitting perspective. So that is the key permit to get projects built in Alberta. And so we've gone through that AUC process. There was no actual hearing that was required because, generally speaking, we have pretty good level of support. The county supports the project. The community supports the project. And so a pretty streamlined process, but obviously there is a bit of back and forth with respect to some of the environmental pieces and geotechnical pieces. But we're just waiting for a decision on that right now. So essentially, we've gone through that process. It's taken a couple of months, 2 to 3 months, and awaiting that final AUC determination. And really, once that happens, that sort of kickstarts quite a few other things from a construction perspective, really. We then have clarity around timing with respect to when we can get this project up and built. Interconnection is happening simultaneous to that process as well. So it is somewhat connected, but also disconnected from an interconnection perspective. You know, we have a pretty high level of confidence that will make its way through that process. So really, the AUC permit on that Alberta project is the key one, and we expect that, you know, potentially any day now. And what will happen is once we receive that, if we receive that, it'll kick off some geotechnical work, some final environmental work, but really then we'll get into the EPC or the construction management portion of it, you know, building out some timelines, getting a process in place to get quotes for the construction of the project, the build of the project, and ultimately look for an off-taker as well. So a power purchase agreement, you know, we chatted about one of the key pieces around these types of projects, getting an off-taker to buy the project. You know, from our perspective in this particular project, we want to own and operate it. So we'll be looking to do all of that ourselves and get it into construction late next year is the current target.
What is, obviously projects like this have their own project financing. What is the total spend or the rough budget on what a project like this costs to develop?
Well, there's sort of the development cost, and then there's the construction cost, I guess.
Yes,
the all-in sort
that's
of
what I mean, the
construction.
all-in kind of
Yeah,
thing.
the all-in construction cost on this type of a project is we haven't gone through that sort of detailed analysis yet to get the bids, but is anywhere from 20 to 25 million Canadian. You know, I know it's a rough number,
Yeah.
but these types of costs definitely fluctuate. So we'll go out and we'll run an RFP for the EPC contractors in this to get those groups put in place. But in terms of that capital stack, what you look at, it depends. Do you have a power purchase agreement in place? If you do, you can utilize a higher degree of debt. If it's merchant market, basically you're selling into a pool. There's perhaps a lower level of debt that you can apply to the project. But generally speaking, we hope to get anywhere from 20 to 20% equity, in terms of being able to inject equity into the project, 20 to 30%, depending on the amount of debt. So, you can sort of do the math in terms of what that looks like from our perspective. But, that's definitely down the road. That's as we get into construction, and move things forward late next year. It's important to note as well, in Canada, we do have an investment tax credit that right now is 30%. So a lot of, and we'll probably chat about this in terms of what's happening in the US right now with the administration, basically removing that investment tax credit after sort of mid next year, potentially. That's in place in Canada. So far more certainty here in Canada for the projects that we're moving through to construction. So it's beneficial. So that's, again, 30% tax credit is huge for these types of projects.
Well, and as well, I think with all the tariff issues, one of the key advantages Canada is going to have is we don't have the crazy high tariffs on solar panels come in. We have the tax credits. We have the ability to create these power projects for a much lower cost than they can in the US. And ultimately that's cheaper power, giving us competitive advantage and greater demand up here.
I mean, we definitely see that. I think there's still some volatility in pricing right now in the market. I think it's fair to say.
Yeah.
But by the time we get to construction on our projects, that will have worked its way through the wash, so to speak, and we'll be in a much clearer position in terms of being able to price these projects from a power purchase agreement perspective. So, there is a little bit of volatility, but in Canada, from our perspective, we always love the fact that we were diversified in terms of our project mix and our geographic mix, but we really love it right now. I can tell you because, some of our late stage projects in Mexico and Canada are moving forward full steam ahead. We still see opportunity in the US, but it's good for such a small company to be this diversified.
For sure. Speaking of the U.S., given the current political environment there, you do have U.S. projects. You've got the NG projects, which you've sold off. How are all those things developing in the current climate?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of give you a bit of a flavor of my own view on the market. I mean, I think we've been sitting here in February. It might have been a bit of a different answer, but I think now we're sitting here end of the summer. I think the market has had time to digest the changes that were obviously brought in, and it was obviously they went a lot further than I think people had realized. There seems to be a bit of stabilization in the market. Obviously I think people would have preferred the tax credits to remain and I guess the longevity of them to remain. They're obviously still in place for a period of time. And it's interesting, it's really only the changes that they brought in have really only brought the tax credit scheme back to where it used to be pre-Biden, where every kind of 3-4 years they were kind of renewed, and you're kind of back into that cycle where the expirations dates just happen to be past maybe the midterm elections or before the next election, and so we'll need to see how all that plays out. But I personally wouldn't be surprised if you saw them renewed for a period of time, or there's some kind of negotiation around those deadlines. But we'll have to see. I think fundamentally when it comes to the US, you have to kind of take a step back and say, what are the key drivers in the US? And, we might have discussed this before where, it's well documented at this stage, but the power demand story in the US is extremely strong. Data centers, AI, reindustrialization, onshoring of industries which had, previously moved out of the US. All of those things are just driving, increased power demand. And whether you look in, just more generally, or whether you go into some of the generation adequacy statements of local regional utilities, you'll see power demand forecasts just going up and up and up. So I think, that's the kind of opportunity, and that's the context, and that's not going away. How renewables plays a part of that is obviously, let's see. But it all comes down to the price of energy. You know, and I think we expect the price of energy to go up to compensate for tax credits being removed, because tax credits at the end of the day were only a funding mechanism, and a funding mechanism to allow you to offer cheaper power. Back to your point, I think on Canada, on the Canadian market, you know, and so there'll be a bit of a period of readjustment around that. But you know, I think that the market is still so strong. Renewables are definitely going to continue to play a key part of it. Obviously, some parts of the sectors have taken a bigger hit than others, like offshore wind. You know, huge issues for the offshore wind sector. Thankfully, we're not in it. You know, storage, I think, probably came through relatively unscathed in terms of the changes. So look, we have some storage projects in the States, which is interesting. You know, as long as you don't have wind on federal land, which we don't, like our wind project is on private land. So I think we're still, you know, cautiously optimistic, I would say, on the US market. And like I said, it's kind of more stabilized now. What is interesting, like we are actually seeing some opportunities in the US as well. So from our perspective, if you know, had access to capital, you know, it definitely would be an interesting time to go and build out your development pipeline in the US quite aggressively, I would think, because these things go in cycles, and like I said, they're kind of longer term, well, even medium or longer term growth forecast for US energy consumption is, you know, are still going up. No one is bringing them down, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and with any kind of financial products or funding, it's whatever the price is, the market will figure out a way to work around it. It's the uncertainty that if you don't know what the rules are, what the prices are, that's when you can't move forward. And that side of things is getting clarified. So I would think that's taking the foot off the brake pedal in the market. So. Yeah,
and I think you refer to the projects we sell to Engie, and you know, we can't really comment on them specifically, but it's interesting if you look at the commentary that's come out of Engie over the course of the year. It was, you know, back probably in February, you know, a lot of uncertainty around the US, and they weren't too sure what they were going to do. They then actually done a big deal in May. I think it was with CBRE around a portfolio of solar and storage projects, as it happens in California and Texas, and this is all development. And then I think just maybe last week or in the recent financial report, they were talking about actually kickstarting projects in the US again. And now that the market is stabilized and they've repriced a lot of power purchase agreements with customers, and you know, there's a sharing of risk around removal of tax credits. That was the kind of language. So I think even from their own perspective, it's moved as the year has gone on. And, you know, I think even that there was a comment, you know, I'm paraphrasing here, I think, where they talk about their development portfolio being unaffected because, you know, these are kind of long dated development portfolios that can kind of ride that cycle as long as you have time to make decisions around PPAs and repricing and, you know, before you make the financial investment itself. So, you know, we're not hearing anything, at least from what they've said publicly, that, you know, would make us think, you know, the projects we sell to them won't ultimately be brought through.
We covered a lot here. Any final thoughts or comments before we wrap it up?
You know, really just to sort of touch on a couple of other items, or one other item really is just around sort of the distributed generation piece in Mexico as well. You know, we took a bit of a refreshed look at how we acquire those types of projects. I think those are the rooftop solar projects on businesses where we sell them power to reduce their operating costs. You know, we've increased our pipeline of those projects up to 195 megawatts now, and have some real near-term opportunities there. So quite excited about that. But just generally speaking, you know, if you look at the remainder of this year with everything that we have going on right now, it's going to be an exciting end to the year. We have real milestones on real projects that are now getting to the stage where they're going to be built. They're going to be brought under our banner, up and operating under the Revolve banner, which is pretty exciting for us. In the past, we've acquired projects, we've built smaller projects, but we are now making that stepwise or step change to these much larger utility type projects, all backed by, you know, current recurring revenue from these projects that we already own and operate. So a pretty exciting and interesting time from our perspective as we make our way through the remainder of 2025.
Myke, Steve, thanks for taking the time, giving us an update. And looking forward to seeing the news as it progresses through the remainder of the year and into next year. Have a great day.
Thanks, Martin.